From forced marriage to real love, the settler girl and the rancher. Amara woke up before sunrise, as she had every morning since she could remember. The soft light of the early dawn spilled through the small window of her room, dust particles floating lazily in the golden beams. She could hear the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen, her mother moving with quiet efficiency, preparing breakfast for the family. Outside, the village was slowly coming to life. The smell of fresh bread from the baker's stall mixed with the earthy scent of the soil, damp from the morning dew. Birds chirped in the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the distant sound of livestock waking up to the new day. Despite the serene morning, Amara felt a heavy weight in her chest. Today was not like other days. Today, she would take her first steps into a life she had never chosen for herself. Her father had arranged her marriage months ago, and now, everything was moving forward whether she wanted it to or not. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor, trying to steady her thoughts. Her mother entered the room quietly, carrying a tray with tea and a small piece of bread. She set it beside Amara and sat down. There was a sadness in her eyes that mirrored the storm of emotions inside her daughter. "Eat something," she said softly. "You will need your strength today." Amara nodded but could not bring herself to eat. The bread felt like ash in her mouth, and the tea was bitter against her tongue. Her father's voice called from the kitchen, firm and commanding. "Amara, it's time." He did not look at her as he spoke. His attention was already on the arrangements outside. The horses were being readied, the carriage cleaned, and the neighbors beginning to gather. Amara rose slowly, her heart pounding. She felt as if every step she took towards the door was a step further from herself. The villagers were already outside when she stepped into the courtyard. Women in bright dresses carried baskets of food, men straightened their coats and hats, and children peeked from behind doors and windows, whispering to one another. Everyone had come to witness the marriage, the joining of two families, though for Amara it felt like a separation from everything she had ever known. She saw the carriage waiting at the edge of the yard, its polished wood shining in the morning sun. Landon's name had been spoken in whispers for weeks in the village, and now she would finally meet him. Her mind raced with imagined faces and personalities. Would he be kind, harsh? Would he understand her feelings, or would he be like the other adults in her life, seeing only duty and obligation? Her father stepped beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Amara, remember your place. Today, you are becoming part of another family. Be respectful, be polite, and do not forget who you are." His words were heavy, carrying both authority and warning. Amara nodded silently, feeling the last threads of her childhood tighten around her like a fragile cocoon. The journey to the ranch was quiet. Amara sat in the carriage, her hands clutching the edge of the seat. Outside, fields stretched endlessly, the wind moving the tall grasses in waves. She watched the landscape, noting small details, the shape of the hills, the color of the soil, the patterns of the trees, but her mind was elsewhere. She imagined the life that awaited her, unknown and intimidating, and a small part of her resisted with a quiet, stubborn fire. When the carriage arrived at the ranch, Amara's breath caught in her throat. The property was vast, much larger than her family's small settlement. The house itself was solid and imposing, built of dark wood and stone, with a wide porch and large windows. Horses grazed in the fields beyond, and a few workers moved quickly to complete their morning tasks. Everything spoke of order, discipline, and wealth. It was beautiful, but it felt foreign, cold even, compared to the warmth and familiarity of her own home. The door opened and a man stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features and serious eyes. Landon. Amara's first impression was of someone who seemed unapproachable, yet there was a quiet strength in his posture, a steadiness that hinted at patience beneath his stern exterior. She stepped down from the carriage, feeling the weight of every gaze upon her. The ceremony was simple but formal. A few witnesses, a short exchange of vows, and a promise that now bound them together. Amara repeated the words she had memorized, each syllable feeling heavy on her tongue. Landon's voice was calm and steady, his words clear and deliberate. They spoke promises they had not chosen, yet words that now carried the weight of their new reality. After the ceremony, the newlyweds walked toward the house. Amara noticed how Landon's eyes scanned the surroundings, attentive to the land and its details. He was cautious but not unkind. He offered his hand to help her over a small step, and she accepted it, noting the firmness in his grip. It was a gesture of politeness, but it sparked a tiny flicker of reassurance. The house felt vast and echoing, each step Amara took creating a hollow sound on the wooden floor. She was shown to her room, modest yet comfortable. The windows overlooked the fields, the horizon stretching endlessly. Alone for a moment, she allowed herself a deep breath. The fear, the uncertainty, and the sadness were still there, but beneath them a small curiosity began to grow. This was her new life, and though she had not chosen it, she would have to navigate it. Landon entered the room briefly, carrying a few bags. His presence was quiet but deliberate. "This will be your room," he said, his voice calm. "We will eat together shortly." There was no warmth in his tone, but no harshness either. It was neutral, practical. Amara nodded, unsure of what to say. She did not want to offend, but she did not yet know how to connect with him. The first meal together was awkward. Silence hovered over the table, broken only by the soft clink of utensils. Amara tried to eat, but her appetite was small. She noticed Landon's careful attention to her, how he did not force conversation but did not ignore her either. He asked a few questions about her journey, about the village, about her family. The questions were simple, but they carried a hint of genuine interest. Amara responded politely, her voice small but steady. After the meal, Landon excused himself to attend to his duties, leaving Amara in the quiet of the house. She wandered to the porch, letting the breeze wash over her. The ranch stretched endlessly, fields and pastures dotted with horses and small structures. She could hear the distant sound of water from the stream that ran through the property. It was peaceful, yet it highlighted the vast difference between this place and the village she had always known. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Amara felt a mix of emotions. Fear, sadness, and homesickness were still present, but so was a tiny thread of hope. She did not know what the future held with Landon, but she realized that she could face this new life with patience and courage. The journey would not be easy, but she would find a way to live fully, even within the constraints of her arranged marriage. The first night in the house was quiet. Amara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the ranch at night. The wind rustled through the trees, a soft and comforting lullaby. Her mind wandered to memories of her family, the smell of her mother's cooking, the laughter of children in the village, and the simplicity of her old life. Yet, alongside these memories, a sense of determination began to take root. She might not have chosen this path, but she could still shape how she walked it. By the time sleep came, it was deep and dream-filled. She dreamt of the fields, the wind, and a life that balanced her old world with this new one. Landon's presence, while distant, was no longer entirely intimidating. He was part of this new life, and whether she liked it or not, their stories were now intertwined. Tomorrow, she would begin learning the rhythms of the ranch, the work, and the life that lay ahead. And so, as the stars twinkled above the quiet land, Amara's journey began. Not with joy or love, but with courage, patience, and the faintest glimmer of hope that somewhere along this path, she might find not only her place in the world but also the freedom to shape her own heart. The first few days at the ranch were a test of endurance for Amara. Every morning she awoke to the sound of roosters crowing and the faint murmur of cattle in the distance. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of earth and grass, but it did little to ease the heaviness in her heart. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new reminders that her life had changed completely. Landon had been patient, at least outwardly, in showing her the routines of ranch life. The chores were harder than anything Amara had experienced in the village. She learned quickly that tending to the livestock required both strength and careful attention. Feeding the horses, checking on the cows, and mending fences became her daily tasks, and though her arms ached and her back protested, she refused to show weakness. Landon watched quietly as she worked, occasionally offering instructions or corrections, his tone calm but firm. At first, Amara found him intimidating. He seemed to know everything about the ranch, every animal, every corner of the land, and he expected her to learn quickly. But she also noticed that he did not mock her mistakes or scold her harshly. He corrected her with patience, repeating instructions when needed, and sometimes guiding her hand through the motions. Though his manner was serious, she began to sense that he respected effort, even if he did not yet express warmth. The mornings were the hardest. The sun would rise over the hills, painting the fields in gold, while Amara struggled to adjust her body to the long hours of labor. Her fingers became calloused, her arms sore, and yet, with every task completed, a small sense of accomplishment bloomed inside her. She began to realize that life at the ranch, though demanding, had its own rhythm and satisfaction. There was something deeply honest about working with the land and animals, a clarity that her life in the village had never offered. Landon, meanwhile, had his own routines that Amara observed quietly. He would ride across the fields, check on the cattle, inspect the fences, and speak to the ranch hands with authority and fairness. Occasionally, he would glance toward the house, as if measuring whether Amara was coping. There was no unnecessary conversation between them at first. Their interactions were functional, focused on the work at hand. But even in this silence, Amara felt a growing awareness of his character. He was not cruel or indifferent. He was deliberate, disciplined, and deeply connected to the land he managed. One afternoon, as the sun beat down mercilessly, Amara struggled to lift a heavy bale of hay onto the wagon. Her arms trembled and sweat stung her eyes. Landon appeared beside her without warning, his presence steady and commanding. "Here, let me help," he said, gripping the bale firmly and guiding it onto the wagon. Amara was surprised by the simplicity of the gesture. It was not an act of pity, nor was it a display of superiority. It was practical assistance, offered without judgment. She felt a flicker of gratitude, though she quickly masked it with her usual quiet reserve. Days turned into weeks, and Amara began to notice small details about the ranch and its people. The ranch hands respected Landon but also had a softer regard for Amara, seeing her determination and willingness to work. A young boy named Thomas often helped her with chores, offering tips and gentle encouragement. She learned to navigate the social dynamics of the ranch, understanding that respect and kindness were earned through effort and consistency. Despite the growing familiarity with her tasks, loneliness remained a constant companion. The evenings were the hardest. She would sit on the porch, looking out over the fields as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of wildflowers and grass, but it could not fill the emptiness she felt inside. Memories of her family, her village, and the simple joys of home flooded her mind. She missed the laughter of children, the warmth of her mother's kitchen, and the comforting presence of her father, despite their strictness. One evening, Landon joined her on the porch. He did not sit close, nor did he speak immediately. They watched the sunset in silence, the world around them quiet except for the rustling of leaves and the distant lowing of cattle. Finally, Landon spoke, his voice calm and deliberate. "How are you finding the work?" Amara hesitated. She wanted to be honest but did not want to appear weak. "It is hard," she admitted, "but I am learning." He nodded, not pressing further. "It takes time," he said. The ranch can be unforgiving if you do not understand it, but you have been doing well." The words were simple, yet they carried an unexpected weight. Amara felt a small warmth in her chest. Praise had always been rare in her life, and hearing it now from someone she had feared stirred a new sense of possibility. As the days continued, Amara began to find small joys in her routine. She discovered a love for tending the garden, feeling pride as flowers and vegetables thrived under her care. She enjoyed caring for the horses, learning their temperaments and forming quiet bonds. Even the physical labor, once exhausting and overwhelming, became a source of satisfaction as she saw the results of her effort. The ranch, which had once seemed vast and intimidating, slowly became a place she could navigate with confidence. Landon, too, began to reveal glimpses of his character beyond the stern exterior. He had a deep knowledge of the land, an appreciation for hard work, and a quiet humor that appeared in fleeting moments. Once, when a stubborn horse refused to cooperate, he laughed softly, a sound that startled Amara, and remarked, "Even the animals have their stubborn days." It was a small moment, but it revealed a side of him that was human, relatable, and not entirely unapproachable. Their interactions grew more natural over time. Amara learned to anticipate his needs, whether preparing meals at times he preferred or organizing tasks efficiently. Landon, in turn, learned to ask for her input, valuing her observations and opinions. They began to function as a team, even if unspoken, relying on each other to manage the demands of the ranch. The initial tension between them began to soften, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. One afternoon, a minor accident occurred while checking the fences. A post had loosened, threatening to let the cattle escape. Amara attempted to secure it herself, but the weight of the post shifted, causing her to stumble. Landon appeared immediately, steadying her and helping her finish the task. "You must be careful," he said, his tone firm but not angry. "The ranch can be unforgiving, and one mistake can have consequences." Amara nodded, feeling a mix of embarrassment and relief. She realized that Landon's presence was no longer purely intimidating. There was a reassurance in knowing he would act to protect and guide when necessary. She began to trust him in small ways, a significant step in a relationship that had started as obligation and fear. Evenings became times of quiet reflection for Amara. She would sit by the fire, listening to the crackle of flames and the distant sounds of the ranch settling into night. Sometimes Landon would join her, reading quietly or working on accounts, and the silence between them no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it became a shared space of calm and understanding. Words were not always necessary. Presence alone was comforting. Amara's thoughts often wandered to the life she had left behind. She missed her family deeply, but she also began to understand that this new life was not entirely devoid of possibility. The ranch was harsh and demanding, but it was honest. There was a rhythm to the work, a satisfaction in accomplishment, and a clarity in the connection to the land. She realized that she could find purpose here, even if it was different from what she had imagined. Landon, too, seemed to notice the changes in her. He observed her growing confidence, her ability to handle tasks, and her willingness to engage with the ranch hands. He began to offer small praises, brief comments acknowledging her efforts. Though still reserved, he was no longer distant in the same way. There was a subtle shift, an opening in the walls that had surrounded both of them. By the end of the first month, a new rhythm had been established. Amara rose with the sun, completed her chores, learned new skills, and found moments of quiet reflection. Landon continued to work alongside her, guiding, instructing, and occasionally sharing small insights into the land and its needs. The ranch no longer felt entirely alien, and the initial fear and resentment that had defined her first days were beginning to soften. Amara began to dream differently. She still longed for her family and the village she had left behind, but she also imagined herself as capable, resilient, and strong. She imagined a life where she could navigate challenges, where she could grow and learn, and perhaps, in time, even find companionship and understanding in the man she had once feared. Though the love she would come to feel was still distant, the foundation was being laid, not through grand gestures or dramatic events, but through shared labor, quiet observation, and mutual respect. Amara realized that life at the ranch, harsh as it could be, offered opportunities to grow in ways she had never anticipated. It was here, amid the fields, the animals, and the steady presence of Landon, that she began to discover her own strength. And so, as the sun set on the ranch each evening, casting long shadows over the fields, Amara felt a cautious hope. She had survived the first trials, learned the routines, and discovered that she could endure more than she had imagined. The ranch was no longer a prison. It was a place of learning, of growth, and of quiet beginnings. Though the journey was far from over, she felt, for the first time since her arrival, that she could face the days ahead with courage, patience, and an open heart. As the seasons changed, the ranch began to reveal its true challenges. What had once seemed manageable now demanded more from both Amara and Landon. The summer had been unusually dry, and the earth, cracked and dusty, made caring for the livestock even more difficult. Every day became a test of endurance, skill, and patience. Amara had grown stronger and more capable over the past months, but this new challenge would push her further than she had imagined. One morning, Amara awoke to the sound of frantic calls from the ranch hands. She leapt out of bed, her heart pounding, and rushed to the barn. The cattle had wandered close to the edge of the pasture where the fence had weakened. Several of the younger calves were struggling to find solid ground, and the older ones were restless, sensing danger. Landon was already there, his expression focused and serious, giving instructions with calm authority. "Amara, help me secure the fence," he called without looking at her directly. "Be quick and careful." She nodded and ran to join him, her hands moving swiftly, her mind entirely focused on the task. The two worked side by side, lifting, tying, and adjusting the fence posts. The work was grueling, the sun beating down on their backs, sweat running in rivulets across their faces. But through it all, there was a rhythm to their movements, an unspoken coordination that surprised Amara. She had come to understand his instructions, anticipate his needs, and adapt quickly. And she noticed, for the first time, that he did not just see her as a helper. He trusted her, relied on her judgment, and respected her abilities. By the afternoon, the fence was secure, and the cattle were calm once more. Amara leaned against the post, her arms trembling from exhaustion, and looked at Landon. He was wiping the sweat from his brow, a faint smile breaking through his otherwise serious demeanor. "You did well today," he said simply. It was the kind of praise that felt rare, meaningful, and earned, and it made Amara's chest swell with quiet pride. Days like this became more common. Challenges arose constantly, unexpected storms, sick animals, and crop shortages. But each one was an opportunity for Amara and Landon to work together, to learn about each other, and to build a connection rooted in trust and shared effort. Slowly, the initial distance between them began to shrink. Amara learned to read his expressions, noticing the subtle changes in his posture or tone that hinted at concern, thoughtfulness, or approval. Landon, in turn, began to observe her more closely, seeing her resilience, intelligence, and capacity for empathy. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day repairing a broken water trough, Amara sat by the porch, her hands sore and her clothes damp from sweat and mud. Landon joined her, carrying 2 mugs of warm tea. He handed one to her without a word, and she accepted it, the steam rising into her face. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Finally, Landon spoke. "You've changed a lot since you arrived," he said quietly. "I didn't expect you to adapt so quickly." Amara looked down at her mug, her fingers tracing the rim. "I had to," she admitted softly. "I couldn't survive if I didn't try." He nodded, thoughtful. "You have more strength than I realized. More patience, too. It's impressive." The words made her heart beat faster, not from fear or obligation, but from something warmer and more personal. She realized that she was beginning to see him not only as her husband, but as a man of depth, integrity, and care. For the first time, she felt a flicker of curiosity about the man behind the stern exterior. The next challenge came in the form of a sickness that swept through part of the herd. Several cows were unwell, showing signs of weakness and lethargy. The ranch hands were concerned, and Landon worked tirelessly to care for them, preparing medicines and keeping a close eye on the animals. Amara, though inexperienced in veterinary care, insisted on helping. She spent hours by the sick animals, learning from Landon and the workers, administering treatments and observing their recovery. Through this shared struggle, the bond between them deepened. They spoke more during these long hours, exchanging ideas, strategies, and even stories from their pasts. Amara learned about Landon's childhood on the ranch, his sense of responsibility to his family and the land, and the hardships he had endured. He, in turn, learned about her life in the village, her dreams before the arranged marriage, and the fears she had carried with her. These conversations, though practical in nature, allowed them to see each other as fully human, complex, capable, and vulnerable. One late afternoon, after a particularly difficult day, Amara and Landon found themselves sitting by the stream that ran through the ranch. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden light over the water. Amara dipped her hands into the cool stream, watching the ripples spread outward. Landon joined her, his own hands brushing against hers accidentally, and neither of them pulled away. "You've done well with the herd," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the water. "They trust you now. And so do I." Amara's heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was profound. Trust was not something she had felt freely in her new life. To hear it expressed openly by Landon was both reassuring and unexpected. She looked at him, noticing the slight relaxation in his posture, the softness in his eyes that had not been there before. "I trust you too," she said softly. "I think I always have, even when I didn't want to admit it." A gentle silence followed, filled only by the sounds of nature. It was the first time they had shared such a moment without the weight of tasks, duties, or expectations. For a brief while, the world felt simple, and the connection between them felt real. The days continued, each one bringing new challenges and opportunities for understanding. Amara began to take initiative in ways she had never imagined. She noticed patterns in the animals' behavior, suggested improvements to the irrigation system, and even began to teach Thomas, the young ranch hand, a few techniques she had learned. Landon observed quietly, occasionally offering praise or guidance, but mostly allowing her the space to grow. He began to see her as a partner in every sense, not merely someone who had been forced into his life. One evening, a sudden storm struck the ranch. Thunder rolled across the hills, and rain fell in heavy sheets, flooding parts of the pasture. The cattle were frightened, and the fences threatened to give way under the torrent. Amara and Landon sprang into action, racing across the wet fields to secure the animals and protect the property. They worked tirelessly, drenched to the bone, their clothes clinging to their bodies, and their movements synchronized by instinct and trust. By the time the storm passed, both were exhausted but relieved. They returned to the house, soaked and shivering, yet there was a quiet satisfaction in their shared effort. Sitting by the fire, drying their clothes and sipping warm tea, they finally allowed themselves to laugh, a sound that had been rare in their lives together until now. "It wasn't so bad," Amara said, smiling despite her fatigue. Landon raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. You almost drowned trying to save the calves. I'd call that pretty bad." She laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I had a good teacher," she said, glancing at him. For the first time, Landon did not correct her, nor did he deflect the compliment. He simply nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. There was a sense of equality now, a mutual recognition of each other's strengths and contributions. As the weeks passed, the emotional walls between them continued to crumble. Amara began to feel a warmth in his presence, a sense of safety and understanding. She realized that the man she had feared and resented was becoming someone she could admire, respect, and perhaps even care for. Landon, too, found himself thinking of her in ways that went beyond duty or obligation. He admired her resilience, her intelligence, and the quiet determination that had carried her through the toughest days. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Amara and Landon walked along the edge of the pasture. The air was calm, the animals settled, and the world seemed at peace. Landon stopped and looked at her, his eyes reflecting both thoughtfulness and a rare softness. "You've changed this ranch," he said quietly. "Not just the work, but everything. You've brought life to it in a way I didn't expect." Amara felt a warmth in her chest that was hard to describe. It was not love yet, not fully, but it was something more profound than respect, a recognition that their lives had become intertwined in a meaningful way. "I've changed too," she replied softly. "I've learned a lot, about this place, about the work, and about you." For the first time, Landon smiled fully, without restraint. It was a smile that held acknowledgement, understanding, and perhaps the first hint of something deeper. In that moment, amidst the quiet of the ranch and the fading light, they both realized that their relationship had transformed. What had begun as a forced marriage was slowly becoming a partnership built on trust, respect, and the beginnings of real affection. And so, as the stars began to twinkle above the ranch, Amara and Landon returned to the house, not as strangers bound by obligation, but as two people who had learned to see each other, to rely on each other, and to understand the strength and depth that lay beneath the surface. Their journey was far from over, but the foundations of something real, something lasting, were now firmly in place. The ranch had settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural to both Amara and Landon. Days were long, filled with hard work, yet they had grown accustomed to the routines. The initial awkwardness and tension between them had softened, replaced by a quiet understanding. Their relationship was no longer defined by obligation or fear, but by mutual respect and shared responsibility. Yet, both of them knew that real love, the kind that touched the heart and lingered in quiet moments, required more than routine. It required trials, choices, and vulnerability. The opportunity came sooner than either of them expected. One morning, word arrived that the river feeding the ranch's irrigation system was swelling after unexpected heavy rains upstream. The water threatened to flood the pastures, wash away fences, and sweep the livestock into dangerous currents. The ranch hands worked quickly, but it was clear that the crisis required both skill and leadership. Amara and Landon moved into action immediately. Amara's heart pounded as she watched the river rise, its muddy waters rushing with a force that was frightening and unpredictable. She had learned to work with Landon, but this was different. The danger was real, immediate, and overwhelming. She looked at Landon, who had already organized the hands and assigned tasks with his usual calm authority. Despite the fear curling in her stomach, she felt a strange comfort in his presence. He was steady, decisive, and reliable. She knew that with him leading, they stood a chance. "Amara, we need to reinforce the lower fences," he said, his voice carrying over the roar of the water. "Can you handle it?" She swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, I'll start immediately." The two of them worked side by side, lifting heavy posts, tying ropes, and digging trenches to divert the water. The storm was relentless, and the river surged with every passing moment. Amara's hands were blistered, her arms ached, and the mud threatened to pull her boots from her feet. Yet she refused to give in to exhaustion. She had learned over the months that perseverance was not just about survival, it was about protecting what you cared for. And now, more than ever, she cared deeply for this land, these animals, and the man standing beside her. At one point, a young calf slipped toward the rushing water, and Amara reacted instinctively. She dove forward, pulling the struggling animal back to safety. Landon's eyes widened, a mixture of alarm and admiration crossing his face. "Careful," he shouted, rushing to steady both her and the calf. Amara's heart was racing, her chest heaving, yet she could not suppress a small, proud smile. Landon looked at her differently in that moment, not merely as his wife, nor as a helper, but as a brave, capable partner. And in his eyes she saw trust, concern, and the first real spark of deep affection. By evening the water had been contained, the fences reinforced, and the livestock safe. Mud covered both Amara and Landon, their clothes soaked and heavy, yet neither of them cared. They stood side by side, panting and exhausted, and for the first time the weight of their shared achievement sank in. They had faced a real challenge together, not one that could be solved alone, but one that required cooperation, courage, and faith in each other. Amara felt a warmth spread through her chest as she looked at Landon. He smiled faintly, his eyes softening. "We make a good team," he said quietly. She laughed despite the fatigue. "Yes, I think we do." The storm had done more than test their skills. It had opened the door to honesty, vulnerability, and connection. That night, as they cleaned themselves and changed into dry clothes, they shared stories of the day, of past experiences, and of dreams for the future. For the first time, there was no hesitation in their words, no fear of judgment. They spoke openly, laughed together, and even shared quiet moments of reflection. In the following days, the ranch returned to its usual rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. Amara and Landon no longer needed to navigate silent tension or cautious interactions. Their conversations flowed naturally, their gestures were considerate, and their eyes often met with an unspoken understanding. They had faced danger together, protected life and land, and in doing so, had discovered a bond that went beyond duty or circumstance. Amara began to notice small things about Landon that she had never seen before. The way his brow furrowed in concentration when he planned tasks, the gentleness he showed toward animals, the rare but genuine smiles he gave when something pleased him. She realized that admiration had quietly grown into affection, and that she had begun to care deeply for the man she had once feared. Landon, too, found his thoughts returning to Amara more often than he expected. He admired her courage, her patience, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. He noticed the way she approached problems with thought and care, how she treated the animals with empathy, and how she faced every challenge without complaint. More than anything, he appreciated her presence, the calm reassurance she brought, the strength she displayed, and the quiet joy she radiated in simple moments. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Landon found Amara sitting alone by the garden. She was tending to the vegetables, her hands carefully removing weeds and arranging the soil. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. "You have a way with this land," he said softly, standing behind her. "I've watched you work, and it's remarkable." Amara turned, her face lighting up with a small, shy smile. "Thank you," she said. "I've learned a lot from you, about the ranch, the work, and about myself." Landon knelt beside her, picking up a small handful of soil and letting it fall through his fingers. "I've learned something too," he said quietly. "I've learned that life is better when shared, when someone else's strength, patience, and care are part of it, and I've learned that I care for you more than I ever expected." Amara's heart raced, her hands trembling slightly. She had hoped for this, feared it, and now felt the reality of it, more profound than words could express. She reached for his hand, feeling the warmth and firmness, and said softly, "I care for you too. I think I always have in ways I didn't understand at first." The moment was quiet, intimate, and filled with the unspoken promises of love. There was no rush, no grand declaration, only the truth of hearts finding each other after months of shared effort, understanding, and growth. From that day forward, their partnership took on a new dimension. Work on the ranch became not only a duty but a shared joy. They planned improvements together, tended to the animals side by side, and spent quiet evenings reflecting on their day and their lives. The bond between them deepened, strengthened by mutual respect, admiration, and now love. Amara's confidence grew even further. She no longer saw herself as the girl forced into marriage but as a capable woman with her own voice, respected by both her husband and the ranch hands. She contributed ideas, made decisions, and was no longer afraid to speak her mind. Landon, in turn, embraced this change, valuing her opinions and recognizing that her insights made the ranch stronger and their partnership richer. Their love was not marked by extravagance or sudden drama. It was quiet, steady, and rooted in the reality of daily life. They found joy in small things: the laughter of animals, the beauty of a sunrise over the fields, the satisfaction of a day's work completed, and the comfort of being together at night. They shared dreams for the future, imagining improvements to the ranch, better care for the animals, and perhaps even a family of their own one day. As winter approached, bringing crisp air and the first snowfall, the ranch looked peaceful and beautiful, a stark contrast to the struggles of previous months. Amara and Landon stood together on the porch one evening, watching the snow settle over the fields. The world was quiet, the sky painted in soft shades of pink and lavender. They held hands, feeling the warmth and solidity of each other's presence. "We've come a long way," Amara said softly, her eyes reflecting the snow and the soft glow of the setting sun. Landon nodded, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Yes, and we've faced it together, that's what matters," she smiled, leaning slightly against him. "I'm glad we did." "Me too," he said quietly. "I love you, Amara, not because of duty or obligation, but because of who you are. Your strength, your kindness, your courage, all of it, I love you." Tears of happiness filled her eyes. "I love you too, Landon. I never thought I could feel this way, but I do, deeply." And in that moment, standing on the porch of the ranch they had worked so hard to maintain, Amara and Landon understood that their journey, one that began with fear, uncertainty, and a forced marriage, had led them to something real, profound, and lasting. They had discovered love not in grand gestures or fleeting passion, but in patience, shared struggle, respect, and understanding. The seasons would continue to change, challenges would arise, and life on the ranch would remain demanding. Yet they faced it together, as partners, equals, and lovers. Their hearts had learned to trust and to care, to support and to cherish. And in that shared life, they had found a love that was not forced, not superficial, but real in every sense of the word. As they watched the snow fall silently over the fields, hand in hand, they knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together, stronger, wiser, and united by the love they had grown through patience, courage, and shared life.